Hi, everybody. This is our first episode of Music Matters, Music Matters podcast, where we talk to celebs, we talk to music industry insiders, all sorts of folks, including even musical instrument manufacturers, magazines, print, media. And today, actually, for my very first guest is my good friend Nigel from France, Nigel J. Farmer. And Nigel is currently the editor of Jazz in Europe magazine and also Jazz Talk News, Music Tribe. It's a whole empire he's built. And we're kind of building together because he's actually my co-producer and partner with Music Matters. So Nigel, how you doing today?
Yeah, great, Darrell. Thanks very much for having me. And it sounds kind of strange when you say building an empire.
I know it's your small
yeah,
castle in France.
yeah, living on a hill.
What part of France are you in?
I'm in southwest France. I'm about half an hour's drive directly south of a well-known town called Bergerac.
Oh, okay,
and,
great. So you're in the good food region, right?
Very much so, yeah. And of course wine as well.
Right, yeah.
So we love it here. It's great. The weather's normally very good. It can get very hot in the summer, but you can of course go in the pool and cool off.
So where and I know some of your background, but some of it actually I'm curious. So where did you're from UK originally, right?
Yeah, I was born in the UK, in Yorkshire actually. So my accent should be a little bit different, but my parents moved me down south to the town of Windsor, the famous town where Windsor Castle is.
Okay, I've been there. That's kind of like a storybook town. When you come into the train station, the castle's up on the hill. And,
yeah. It's so lovely.
Home of Legoland, which is.
That's right. Yeah. Well, before that, it was called a safari park. And in my summer holidays as a school child, I went there. What's called litter picking. And it was you had one of those spikes, and you got a bag, and
right.
You just
go
to pick up. But you got money. You got money for it, which is great.
So how did you end up in France?
Well, it's very protracted. Very quickly, I'll summarize it. Thanks primarily to my dad, who worked for the airlines, and which allowed the whole family to get flights and travel cheaply. I got to travel by an early age. By the time I was 18, 19, I left the UK, emigrated to New Zealand, spent a decade there, sort of ended up, the old story, arrived as a boy and left as a man.
Right.
Yeah. Then went on to working in Australia, Hong Kong, came back to the UK for a brief period of time, culture shock.
Right.
Went on, set up a business, traveled all around Europe and America, then moved to Canada, actually, to Vancouver, BC.
Right, and you were actually an immigration agent in Canada for a while, right?
That's right. Yeah, I worked for the immigration system or services, as you say, and it was a very, very rewarding work. And the Canadian system is great that it allows you, if you choose to be what's called a contractor, then you can pursue other endeavors as well at the same time, which is what I always wanted to do.
Right.
So I was effectively a contractor, and then I had other businesses on the side. And then I came back to the UK briefly, and then on to France, and spent my parents lived here. They moved from the United Kingdom down to France. And after my father passed away, I had an opportunity to spend, some time with my mum,
right.
Which I hadn't really, and to sort of reconnect with her. And while I was here in France, I actually met my beloved, Pia.
Ah, okay.
And so we've been, we're in our home here now, which we've made together. Going on nearly 10 years.
Great. So, that's actually one of the most beautiful parts of the world.
Yeah.
I love, I mean, obviously France is known for the food, but just that's just a cool, like you have the little villages. That's a really neat place.
Yeah.
How did you get your or find your path to being an editor for jazz in Europe? Like how did that, were you a musician or you were always, I know you have a love for music. How did that kind of
Mm.
happen for you?
Okay, well, sort of going back to my dad. Dad was you can see my guitar, one of my guitars behind me.
Right.
Dad was a massive jazz fan, and always included me in his records. And he came home one day very excited and said, "God, Nigel, you've got to listen to this. This guy is the next Wes Montgomery."
Right.
Like,
Wow.
okay, who's that?
Yeah,
So he bought the album Breezing by George Benson.
right. Okay.
And so I sat in this
such
long
such a
lounge.
great
Oh
record.
yeah.
Yeah.
And Dad had beautiful Wharfdale speakers set up in each corner,
Mhm.
and it's one of those memories. It's a golden nugget memory because
Sure.
here I was being introduced to something, a particular form of jazz that I just fell in love with immediately.
Hmm.
Um,
And George was like, it was cool with him because he was very accessible. It wasn't like
oh
the avant-garde out stuff. It was like sort of, I don't want to say pop jazz, but a little bit. Obviously, he had some huge pop hits.
yeah, no, I mean, This Masquerade and
Right.
all the
Classics.
Love Times Love is one I really enjoy.
Right.
And I actually went to see him in Wembley, and he was just as great live as he was on the record.
And he's
the
a
LP.
sweet guy too, which is
Absolutely wonderful. The whole crowd it was one of those concerts, where it's full up, Wembley Stadium. Can you imagine that? And it's full up with goodness knows how many people.
But jazz.
And he walks on stage, and then the first track starts, and then everybody stands up, and nobody sat down after that. Everybody was dancing in their aisle pieces.
That's the thing too, because I mean, we talk about guys like, I know Kenny G is a controversial name a little bit in the jazz world, but like guys like Benson, guys, Chuck Mangione, those guys really opened the world of jazz up to many people that had not really been jazz fans, right? They're very influential.
Into mainstream, definitely. And personally very grateful. I think that, coming sort of quickly to, the present almost, I've been involved in the music in an amateur capacity,
right,
for a long time.
Yeah, you're a fan for sure, right?
Yeah, and I got very fortunate to meet some really key people,
right,
especially in Vancouver, actually, where I lived, BC. Mm-hmm. And then when I was here, Pia, my wife, we were listening to something on the radio, and there was always adverts, and it's like, and it's like it just sort of broke the mood of husband and wife having a beautiful meal with a glass of red wine in southwest France, and then there's an advert for garden furniture or something. I don't know, or fertilizer. Whatever, or something. Yeah. So she said to me, "God, I wish we had our own jazz radio station." I went, "Okay." I like it when a plan gets hatched. So I developed something called Jazz Republic Radio, which is an internet radio station.
Was quite successful, right?
Yeah, it went viral all around the world. 177 countries it was it touched and played in. I was featured on in Paris. Every year there's a big sort of radio show, and Salon de Paris, or Salon de Radio in Paris, right. And I was one of the main radio streams that was played throughout the venue to customers. Awesome. and so on and so forth. And my voice was heard because I'd done jingles and so on and so forth. And didn't matter the fact that it was English.
And it was internet radio, right?
Yeah, it was an internet radio station.
Yeah.
And then
which has become a huge I mean, along with podcasting, it's actually become a really huge thing, right?
Very much so. And, the next thing, I've got Le Monde from Paris on the phone wanting to interview me, and other well-known periodicals
Right.
around the world. And
it opened, opened a lot of doors, right?
It absolutely did. And I sort of morphed into doing a bit of podcasting. Had originally done some radio when I was a younger man for volunteer work. So I'm thinking, hey, this is great. So what started off as my wife saying, I wish we had our own radio station, morphed into this. And I think it's about riding the wave.
Sure.
But you got to recognize it,
Well, and we talked about that before too, because we actually me and Nigel chat. We have our 5 a.m. chats. Well, 5 a.m. for me. And one of the things we talked about too is just, being having an entrepreneurial spirit. Every great company, Coca-Cola, Virgin, whatever, Tesla, all started with just an idea, right? Even, you have to have that little nugget to kind of jump off with.
Yeah, that classic back of the napkin sketch,
Sure.
But then, of course, it's about taking it from concept, through to a tangible thing.
Sure.
And I think that one of the greatest gifts that I didn't realize until I got much older that I gave myself was the fact that I became an immigrant by immigrating right onto the other side of the world as a young man. Right. I couldn't just call mum and dad and say, hey, bail me out or anything like that.
Yeah, you had to find your own path, right?
Yeah. And therefore didn't sort of suffer. And I use the word suffer just as a way of expressing something not meant to be offensive, but I didn't suffer from entitlement issues. It was nose down, bottom up, and go.
You got to make it work, right?
You got to make it work. And as you quite rightly say to me, one of your wonderful catch-alls is it's a process, and it quite rightly so. And I think that one of the things that I enjoy about our relationship is that we're always brainstorming and swapping ideas and accepting that it's like the old adage, for every no, you're closer to a yes.
Right. And it's also too having having different perspectives, like we have different life experiences. We all both have something. Everybody has something to bring to the table. You have to be willing to listen and be open to other people's ideas, right?
Yeah, and that's of course with you and I through being introduced through another journalist, Fiona, who was also writing for Jazz in Europe.
So Fiona Ross, and who's also besides being a terrific writer, interviewer, is also an amazing jazz musician, producer. She's kind of wearing all hats. And did you know Fiona was the original Annie on the West End of London? Which is a funny story. Right, we're gonna have her on the podcast, and I'm gonna pick on her about that a little bit. She kind of dropped that. She dropped that nugget on me. I'm like, wait a minute.
You better put 3 hours aside because her story is absolutely fantastic.
It's great. It's awesome.
So I got in fact, somebody called out a really lovely Aussie guy called Andrew Reid.
Right. Mutual friend.
And I was helping a really talented jazz vocalist who'd moved from the UK to France, possibly find a record company, a record label.
That's Paula.
That's right, and that's Paula Vera. Okay. And we've become really good friends, and we also do one of my other projects.
Right, because she helps out. Because you actually also you have a voiceover studio, and she's one of your female voices, and she's great, and also a great musician, singer.
And she's my goodness me, she's actually the only non-French professor of jazz music in the whole of France.
Wow.
Which
that's amazing.
To reach that level
Yeah.
of education
And there's
is
some
extremely impressive.
terrific, yeah, and there's some terrific artists in France. I mean, not only
Yeah,
French artists, but expats that live there that are also. I guess France has
yeah,
always been sort of a draw for that, right? I mean, Paris. You think of Paris in the '30s, the
yeah.
jazz, the art movement. It's
Oh,
really.
and
I guess it's just
Josephine
really
Baker.
sure, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's so deep in the culture there. So you had
Yeah.
to get back to Jazz Republic Radio. So that was very successful, and you met Andrew
Hmm.
Reed, and Andrew is publisher for Jazz in Europe magazine, correct?
Yeah.
And one of our he's also a terrific bassist, and he's based in
Oh wow,
Amsterdam,
yeah.
right?
In outside in another place called Hengelo, but
Okay.
yeah, he's also a classic example of he was in a #1 boy band in
Oh,
the
I didn't know
80s.
that. That's funny.
Yeah, in Australia there was there was most people know Men at Work,
Right.
and then there was another group called Perfect Strangers,
Okay, I
and
didn't know that.
he was where they had #1 hits, and he was
Interesting.
in fact he also was offered a the bass playing job for Men at Work, and he turned it down.
Oh, funny.
And it's
Yeah,
like,
that's funny.
oh man, yeah,
I know, yeah. You know what? And we all, and the thing is, what's funny is we all have those stories. I mean,
yeah, I know,
I've got like, I mean, we'll talk about that down the road, but I had
yeah.
a phone call for Ray Charles back in the day,
Oh,
and I couldn't do it because I was on the road. I would have had to abandon the band I was currently with,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and like it just killed me. But you know, you have to
I know
make those
it's strange.
decisions.
I think Andrew's interesting because way back then, of course, the whole pop era. I mean, his band supported throughout Australia and Asia Queen with Freddie
Right.
Mercury when they were
Sure.
over there. So, but he's been in the music industry for since he was knee high to a grasshopper.
Yeah, and Andrew
they
also
say.
had his do you remember what's the name of the label that he had? Because he had his own jazz record label.
Yeah, well, he was part of something, and but that's sort of, as I understand it, that's closed now. But
Right. Yeah. Now he's
but
kind
he
of doing
also,
boutique stuff.
oh, I
But
mean,
but
yeah,
he's, and I mean, what's amazing actually with getting back to Jazz in Europe,
mhm,
what's amazing about Andrew, so he's the publisher, but he's also handles the artwork and the layouts,
yeah,
and
yeah,
honestly, like it's world class. If anybody out there gets a chance to check out one of the print, and we'll talk about how to find that online.
yeah,
But one of the print magazines, or all of the print magazines that have been put out by Jazz in Europe,
yeah.
they're
He's
beautiful, like amazing.
absolutely, he's a very talented and multi-talented personality, and again, another sort of guy that hasn't suffered from entitlement issues.
Right. Yeah, he's
Is an
hard
immigrant.
worker.
Yeah, basically a hard worker and an immigrant,
Sure.
and it manifests itself in the platform online, and also
Right.
in the work that he does, and also he subs himself out to artists in all musical genres, to do work for them,
Right.
including designing their CD programs and
Yeah.
packages and artwork and so on and so forth.
So
And
what made you you and Andrew decide, because you guys, I mean, Jazz in Europe has been your baby really from the start. You guys are partners, and
yeah, well,
I mean,
Andrew,
it's really built into something, globally known. And I mean, fortunately, from opportunities you guys have given me, I mean, I've been able to speak to some of the world's great musicians. I mean, multiple Grammy winners, Bobby Santabria,
it's been a pleasure.
Kenny Garrett, all those guys. So tell me that story, like how that you guys sat down and decided to start.
Well, through connecting Paolo Vera with a record label that he was involved with at the time, and he was aware that I was doing Jazz Republic Radio, and then said, "Hey, would you be interested in featuring some of the artists from this label?" And I said, "Sure," and then we got sort of chatting, and I think that again, both immigrants both recognize what's required to make things work.
Right, both
He knows
entrepreneurs.
I love jazz.
Yeah,
the entrepreneurial thing, and he tells me this story about this young guy that's Dutch descendant from America, that comes to Europe and thinks there's no English-speaking jazz magazine in Europe.
Right.
I want to start one up. And so this young boy young man contacts Andrew and then says, can you make this website for me? And Andrew says, yes. And then sadly, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And
Wow.
so Andrew gets a phone call from him saying, please, will you look after this for me? And
Right.
of course, Andrew's not going to say, I won't.
Sure. Right.
He's got compassion like most of us. But once the young man passed away, Andrew, of course, was busy with all sorts of other projects. So there was a couple of people that temporarily attempted to do things with him. But he told me the story and the passion of this young man, and it really touched me. And Jazz Republic Radio was just at a point where I felt that with some of the restrictions that were inevitably being placed on, internet radio
Right.
in
Because that's
different countries.
always
Yeah,
changing. Sure.
yeah. So, this whole thing about it's not only recognizing when the wave's about to start and ride it, it's knowing when you jump off the board as well,
Right.
because the
Sure.
wave's going to dissipate, right?
Yeah.
So I made that choice, and timing wise, this came up, and I went, okay, I'll do it. So he said, well, would you be the editor? I said, well, I've never done that before, but I've certainly worked at a high level of
And it's funny because
writing.
that's exactly what I told you when you approached me about writing for Jazz in Europe.
Yeah.
But we'll get to
it's
that.
Like,
Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So I said, okay. So I've never been one of these people that is into titles, so to speak.
Right.
For me, it's all about teamwork.
Yeah.
And but I have been in management for a long time and had, I've looked after up to 200 staff and been in charge.
You know how to put the machine together to make it all work. And
yeah, and I know how to. I hope I can say this, hand on heart, with human capital, as they say, and that you recognise that the whole team is only as strong as the weakest link.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Therefore, it's about cross-fertilization of skill sets and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And one of my jobs is always to sort of oscillate between the big picture and the little details. So anyway, I took on this project and committed to it with about just under 5 years ago. And it was basically nothing, just because of circumstances, but there was the potential. I could smell, the potential. So
yeah, because really there's, jazz compared to pop is, smaller in I guess reach, obviously, but jazz fans tend to be extremely loyal, tend to be very passionate about the music, and it seems like on the face of it, the biggest jazz related publications are all US based.
Yeah, that's right.
Downbeat, of course, for everybody. That's sort of the gold standard, I guess, for that. And then there's some right, and then there's some other ones, but you guys managed to get Jazz in Europe up in the top echelon of jazz magazines quickly, right?
Yeah.
Which is something. And then I kind of came in on the social media aspect later, but you really built something really great in 5 years. That's amazing.
Yeah, thanks. But there's no magic secret to it. It is, people don't know that, sometimes I work 18 hours a day. And
I know, because when we chat, you're like, I'm just doing this.
Yeah,
it's editing, it's putting the pieces together, it's getting talent or getting interview, arranging interviews. It's such a huge.
I think the thing is that when I use the word work, but I was certainly enjoying it.
Right.
So the process of building something from virtually zero into a world-class product in how long a period of time. And I remember actually saying to Paola Vera, I can't really help you until people know who I am. And right now, people don't know who I am. That was 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, you have to get
But now
your credibility established.
that's exactly right. Because I'm this who the hell's Nigel J? You know, or Nigel. No, I'm known as Nigel J,
Right.
and that's a bit of a play on jazz. You know, but my middle name John.
Right.
And you know, you got to have a hook, as they say, right? But now people that you say that name and they know what it means.
Right.
And look, you know, it's been the yeah, it's been like that sometimes.
Yeah.
And you know, there's what I've learned about the jazz industry is, yes, there's a loyalty, but it's like any other industry worldwide. So I've applied all of the business skills and acumen that I developed over 40, nearly 50 years now.
Yeah. Because a lot of the same skills, I mean, the business skills, they transfer, right?
Yeah, and I think that's what I realized, that there was. It was funny, you know. I used to, and that's why I resonated with you, because you stood out from the crowd to what I would call a lot of normal musicians, and you had an entrepreneurial spirit, which I really appreciated, you know.
Yeah, that's actually, we'll tell people how we kind of connected, because it was actually through our friend Fiona. Fiona Ross.
Another lady that's got an entrepreneurial.
Yeah, I mean, and amazing background.
Yeah. And a real firecracker.
Yeah.
Personality as well. Great love. Really, just a real salt of the earth.
Yeah, I had done I had done just to explain, like I had done an interview, actually a Facebook Live interview with her at her recording studio in London, and you saw that, and then you kind of reached out to me about maybe doing some interviews and recording, or doing interviews written. And it was funny because that's not been my background. I mean, yeah, basically I'm a musician, although I like doing the interview thing. It's fun for me, and it's something I've developed a real passion for. But I was a little trepidatious. One thing I told you was I would need a really good editor, because I'm not the world's best, actually, you know, physical writer. And you said, well, I can do that. I'm brave enough to take on that task, which is a huge task. But you know, we've had a lot of fun together through that. And it's amazing, because actually jazz in Europe, I mean, you've literally, I mean, almost, I wouldn't say almost since the beginning, because of course it built, but you've actually gotten access to the world's global elite list of jazz artists. And not only that, but also featuring up and coming, which is something I really have a passion for. We just did Ambrose Akimusiri. I think I'm pronouncing his last name right. And which is, I mean, he's you know, really avant-garde, really interesting guy from Blue Note Records, and those guys. So it's amazing that you built that.
Yeah. Kurt Elling,
right?
You know, through Fred Hurst, you know, we've done Joey DeFrancesco. Well, we've done all of them. You know, we've done things on the Joe Laverno, you know, Kenny Garrett, the Gil Evans Orchestra,
right?
A real sort of mix.
And I think that's the advantage too of having the different writers who are coming from different perspectives. We have Ermina also in London, who's great, and her husband Carl is the house photographer at Ronnie Scott's. I had the fortunate a chance to meet with them for lunch in London last time I was there, and it's a great. What's awesome about that, about the team with Jazz in Europe, everybody is nice people, really smart. The interviews are really interesting. I think they're well done. I'm not talking about my own, but I'm talking about everybody else.
Oh, yours is great.
Oh, well, and
I just do a little bit of fairy dust behind the scenes.
Yes, as you should. It makes sense. But so Jazz in Europe has been going, and I know it's always changing and morphing a little bit, and you've had there's been some personal challenges for some folks, but that's, you know, you're getting through that. So what you also along the way have built and established music tribes and Jazz Talk News.
Jazz Tribe Network now.
Right. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, quite rightly, as you say, you know, everything, and of course the current circumstances globally, which have impacted the music industry.
Right. Sure. And that's another thing I wanted to ask you about, but go ahead.
Okay. But prior to that, I touched on podcasting way back when I was in Vancouver, BC, when it really started in the sort of year 2000-ish,
Right.
1998,
Just the very beginnings, right?
Yeah, and I was involved in it then, so I knew all about it.